Well, it's a cold day in HE hockey sticks when I enjoy a chapter of MHA more than I enjoy a chapter of JJK, but here we are. Because, well, like it or not, MHA is currently barreling towards its inevitable finish. And in no chapter of MHA has that ever felt more apparent than chapter 422. I mean, sure, we've had massive blowouts between All Might Iron Man and All for One, and Bakugo and Baby All for One, and Deku with a Shigaraki who was trying to destroy Mount Fuji. And sure, Deku has injected all of the previous owners of One for All into Shigaraki's subconscious to break away to the child in there, to reach out to him and shake the evil out of him. But it always felt like there was something more in the story. There was always more to be told. And while Deku breaking into the subconscious of Shigaraki and trying to reach out to the child within him felt like it could have been the ending, it was pretty quickly revealed in that very same chapter that that was not the ending. And that instead that All for One would rise up from Shigaraki's subconscious, possibly destroy Shigaraki in the process, and possibly destroy the rest of the world. And thus this gangly, broken version of Shigaraki's body being controlled by All for One in an all-out battle against the rest of humanity's heroes, well, at least in Japan, has been taking place over the last couple of chapters. And while we had a on your left situation with Korigiri opening a myriad of portals for all the half-broken heroes to step onto the battlefield against All for One, it truly felt as though this moment might have been introducing a little bit of extra length onto MHA, as we could have seen all of these double H's or handicapped heroes try and take down All for One at a time. However, that doesn't seem to be the approach, as all but immediately every hero that entered onto this battlefield to cover it with even more blood began to work together in order to clear a path for Deku, who is presumably going to use the last vestiges of One for All he has left in his body to take down All for One. But how did we get here? How does that path get cleared? What were the Easter eggs released in this chapter? And do I believe Deku has an actual chance to end the story in the upcoming chapters? Well, we're about to get to all that and a whole lot more, because today we're talking chapter 422 of MHA Explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me keeping you informed on all things anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to see me live, come on down to Houston, Texas for Memorial Day weekend, May 24th to the 26th, because I'm going to be doing 6 panels at Comic Palooza, talking everything from how to become an anime YouTuber to Hunter x Hunter and Naruto. So to say that the last couple of weeks have been rocky for my relationship with MHA is not a stretch. I have not a singular ounce of hesitation in me when I say that chapter 419 was my favorite chapter of MHA I've ever read. I also don't have a singular ounce of hesitancy in me when I say that chapter 420 was one of my least favorite chapters of MHA I've ever read.
Oh, but Nick, in chapter 420, we get the reveal of Korigiri's portals in the on the left Avengers Assemble moment.
Yeah, we also get literally the idea of consequences stripped away from Deku as he gets his arms back immediately. Like, why even lose them at that point? It's literal death baiting. And chapter 421 was, it was kind of a nothing burger. It was kind of just everybody getting together and being like, whoa, big strong bad guy. But chapter 422 is different. See, I'm not going to sit here and say that this is the exact ending I would have written for MHA, but it's definitely one I would have anticipated. See, the reason that I was so in love with the idea of Deku losing his arms is because technically he didn't need them. Deku's built his entire fighting style around his feet. So if Deku were to lose his arms and have to live his life out as an armless hero, or possibly just get healed later by Eri, I would have been super down for that. But that didn't happen. So now Deku, highly injured as he is now just running to sock All for One in the face with the help of every person he's ever met ever. And this is exactly the kind of ending you would anticipate from MHA, because for as long as MHA has been running, everybody's been kind of yelling at Horikoshi to include Class 1A and the cavalcade of other interesting characters that have been introduced over the course of 422 chapters more. And thus, that's exactly what Horikoshi has been doing. And this chapter is kind of the perfect example of that. As everyone from Gentle Criminal to Mawata Futa, yes, Mawata Futa, you know who that is? The second year from UA who doesn't have any screen time, shows up to help in this battle. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Mawata Fuwa How could I forget? But enough of the pomp and circumstance, let's get into what happened in chapter 422. Because a lot happened, and you might have missed some of it. The chapter starts off where chapter 421 ended, with Ayama and Deku running towards All For One. However, one of All For One's tentacles breaks the ground under Ayama and he falls behind. But he tells Deku to keep running. And I mean, like, genuinely, did we think the French traitor was gonna make it all the way to All For One? That's not that surprising. Ayama having one of the more interesting and compelling character development arcs in the late game of MHA will never not be one of the more complexing things in this entire manga. Just like from an absolute nothing character to like top 5 most important is crazy to me. Deku, probably not all that worried about Ayama, continues running. It's at this point that we cut to Aizawa, who's yelling at Shirakumo, or Korogiri, to make another portal. However, when he looks over at Shirakumo, he realizes that he has no more strength left, as all of his fire is beginning to leak down his body. I guess it's not fire, it's ethereal, black, wispy, but you get it. We then pen to the battlefields where we see All For One's black tentacles destroying the entire landscape and all the heroes who just arrived in the portals trying to either deflect them or clear a path for Deku, which is exactly what Aizawa says for everybody to do, to clear a path for Deku. And thus in this moment we see every character from Snipe to the guy whose name I think is Manga, who can make letters out of what he says. That's a really bad description of what he can do. He can make giant forms, like physical forms of the words he wants to make. So like he could be like pen, and then a big writing of the word pen would show up. Regardless, they're all attacking All For One, but the attacks aren't working, and thus all of these attacks are being launched at All For One to distract him and clear a path for Deku. However, because the attacks are so incredibly trivial to All For One, he begins to prepare the same attack he used against Bakugo, a full release of all quirk factors, turning his body into this monstrous scorpion form whose tail is charging up a laser beam. And All For One tells him that this time the usage of this technique will be different because his emotions are not clouded. If you'll remember, just a couple of chapters ago, All For One used this attack against Bakugo. But because he wanted to kill All Might and kill Bakugo, Bakugo was able to trick him by getting a little bit of his sweat beads into All For One's mouth that he was able to remotely explode. But All For One, who seems to be numb to the world after the perceived death of his brother, is now no longer affected by the emotions that crippled him in his battle against All Might and Bakugo. And thus he condenses all of his power into a laser and fires it at Deku, who is running at him on the path that all of the heroes that came to the battlefield are clearing for him. But Toru, Invisible Girl, jumps in and snags the laser and redirects it. Now, if you guys remember, this is kind of Toru's ultimate technique that she figured out while battling side by side with Ayoma. And that is, since her quirk is invisibility, she's able to control how light passes through her. Thus, by allowing the laser to pass through her, she's able to reflect it back at All For One. And since a laser is technically just light, this kind of plays. It is also just a really cool way to give screen time to a character in an important moment who hasn't played an important role in the majority of MHA. But Class 1A decides to double down on the whole firing of laser beams at All For One. As while Toro is redirecting this laser beam back at All For One, Momo makes a railgun, which, when did she learn that? Also, how much fat does that take? Listen, I get that Momo's been working on her quirk for like basically the entirety of MHA, and when it comes to wasted potential characters, she probably takes the top spot. But you telling me this girl just figured out the exact mechanics of a railgun, and that she, this deep into the battle, still had enough fat left to make one? That's a big step, especially for somebody who's never even made like a pistol.
Oh, but Nick, she made a cannon.
Yeah, kind of different from a railgun. I mean, like not that, like, it's different enough. One's black powder, one's electricity, and technically she doesn't make the electrical part. And I actually really like this part because the electricity for the railgun is provided by Kaminari, which is great because he's already loopy, so God knows how far this pushed him. But apparently a point blank shot from a railgun isn't enough to hurt All For One, as he blocks the shot and the laser being redirected his way. And that's wild because a railgun literally shoots projectiles at Mach 6, roughly 4,500 miles per hour. So that's a pretty crazy durability feat for All For One. And after blocking 2 attacks that would kill 99.99% of people in the MHA universe, All For then launches another onslaught of black tentacles at all of the heroes in the battlefield. And Deku is charging up to clear them all out so he can make it to All For One's body. But once again, the side story heroes break in to kick away the black tentacles so that Deku doesn't have to waste his energy. Heroes like Sero, the Beast Boy, and Vine Girl from Class 1B, Annie Voice, Soji, and Suyu, and of course Ojiro, hero who's played a weirdly large role considering the fact his quirk is tail. And after the B team comes in and wipes away these black tentacles, Shoji and Tsuyu grab Deku and launch him. And it's at this point that a trend starts. See, in this chapter, there's a trend to people stepping in to help Deku. And then we see the people important to these people helping Deku reacting to the people that are important to them helping Deku. For Tsuyu, that's her family, who are all different variations of frog. I mean, I knew quirks were genetic. I didn't think it was that bad. And then for Shoji, there's a little girl that he saved in the heteromorph arc that's reacting to him helping Deku. They both tell him different variations of go out there and slug him, champ. However, they throw him directly in the path of an all-for-one big old black tentacle. And it's at that point that we get into the NC-17 part of this manga. Yes, that's right. Horikoshi takes a hard turn to the hentai. I'm kidding. It gets deflected as well. And this time, Deku is spared from his fate of becoming the MC of a 6-episode dungeon-crawling anime by Mina and Kirishima, who went to middle school together. So fortunately, the only people we need to see react to them helping Deku is their middle school friends. They also tell Deku, get out there, chief. And Deku lets out what appears to be a blood-curdling, eye-whitening scream as he activates at what appears to be an excruciating level of pain, what appears to be shoot style or full cowling. It looks like he's activating One for All, which he's activated a couple of times in his bum rush of All for One, though it appears as though he's having a difficult time activating, because it's important to note here, he stated in the last chapter that he no longer has One for All. Though, like All Might in his last fight against One for All, he still has some embers. And that is a very important connection to make that Horikoshi is kind of beating over our head, considering the fact that Deku is wearing an All Might t-shirt. All for One then begins to ponder why all of these heroes who are almost dead are still fighting. Like Earphone Jack, who only has one earphone jack left, and Mineta, who has never been particularly useful, but now only has one eye. And it's at this moment that All for One remembers what Deku said while they had a conversation in the Vestiges. That is either Shigaraki's subconscious or Deku's subconscious, where all of the previous users of One for All were. And it's in this moment that All for One remembers how Deku talked about himself as being useless. And we then cut back to Deku, who's still running towards All for One, doing his best Luffy and Dressrosa impression, or really Luffy in any arc post-time skip impression. There's always like 20 episodes of running. And as Deku is running, Gentle Criminal slides in and builds him a trampoline, which Deku uses to jump using his full howling very far. And like, who would have thought Gentle Criminal was going to play such a big role in the ending of MHA? Like, by far and away, everybody's least favorite antagonist literally caught the entirety of UA's floating anti-Shigaraki space station and is now hurtling Deku towards All for One. You know who's not here? Stain, Muscular, other antagonists people like more than Gentle Criminal. And sure, they're still bad guys. Kind of. But still, it's just funny. And while watching all of this, All for One realizes that Deku's weakness is something that All Might never had. See, his imperfection is what makes his friends continually get up and up and up, as they realize they need to help Deku because he isn't gonna figure this out on his own. And thus he motivates all the heroes around him to be better and stronger because he can't fix everything. And after Deku lands from the world's biggest trampoline jump, both Tokiyami and Death Arms wish him good luck. And there's gonna be like a lot more of that. But fortunately, somebody realizes that we're not gonna wishes and prayers our way out of All for One trying to destroy the entire world. And so Ida, the person who probably should have been running with Deku from the start, grabs Deku's arm. But probably because he's realizing that Deku's getting real close and is about to get real closer, All for One lifts up his hand and is about to launch an attack from his handhold. But in a beautiful moment of womanhood, well, he starts bleeding. And to this point, then he looks up at the sky and says, "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret." Kidding, he just gets confused. We then cut to what's left of All Might laying on the ground talking to the US pilots that brought Stars and Stripes over to Japan, who are putting him back together like a Lego set. And the pilots are basically saying that Deku inspired them to join the battle. And All Might is saying that seeing Deku has made him realize that Deku has become, and I'm not doing a cliffhanger here, the manga's doing a cliffhanger here, but as All Might is talking about this, he's looking at his very bloody arm and beginning to lift it towards the sky. And it's at this point in the story that for some reason Horikoshi just decides to canonize literally every movie movie, because we see Melissa Shield, one of the main characters from the second movie, watching the fight and yelling at Deku, good luck. And then we see Roddy and Pino from the third movie doing the same. And while Melissa has made a cameo in the manga prior, this is Roddy's first ever time appearing in the manga. I think. I'm like 70% sure. But Roddy existing does technically canify the events of the third movie, which is wild, because a lot happens in that movie. Also, I'm sorry, Melissa made a cameo in the anime on episode 58, not chapter 58. We then cut back to Deku as Ida is falling behind as his engines have appeared to blown a piston or something. And Ida is telling Deku that he now understands what Uraka was talking about when she said that the nickname Deku makes her think of do your best. Now, for those of you who don't remember or don't speak Japanese, Deku, the Japanese word, refers to a wooden dollar puppet, and thus calling somebody Deku is kind of like calling them a blockhead, stupid, if you will. And thus Bakugo gave Deku the nickname of Deku because he thought that he was good for nothing or unable to accomplish anything, which is why Uraka, upon hearing it, thought do your best. We then cut to the woman we're talking about, Uraka, who's in the helicopter, not dying, but definitely close to it, as she says, do your best. After which Deku firmly plants a leg in the ground and begins to jump at All For One. We then see America's second black president order all US heroes go to Japan, which is like way too late. There's a joke in there. I'm not gonna make it. I think get a massive compilation shot of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 panels of people saying do your best to Deku. People like Airy, Horn Hat Kid, the police guy. Bottom right panel appears to be a monkey man with elf ears. It's after the second most positive compilation I've seen today. We see All Might lifting his fist towards the sky as Deku takes flight towards All For One above his fist. And it's in that moment that All Might says, on this day, you became my greatest hero. That's not the last person who gets to cheer for Deku, because immediately after All Might, we have his secret wife, Inko, also cheering for Deku. Inko is Deku's mom, and there's a joke in the community that All Might and her, you know, you read the memes. And the chapter ends with Deku landing a hard punch into the chest of All For One. Now, will this be enough? It's kinda gotta have to be. Listen, I'm all for more MHA content, but we just spent an entire chapter of everybody with their one legs, one eyes, and one arms trying to get a gajillion black tentacles out of the way so Deku could land one punch. We are probably not doing that again. And there is nobody left in the story who could stand even the remotest chance against All For One outside of Deku. So do I think it's a possibility that Deku's gonna stay close to All For One next chapter and possibly land some additional punches? Maybe. But if All For One ever separates from Deku again, the story's over, or at least it needs to be. Because while I thought this chapter was incredible and everybody coming out of the woodworks to help Deku in his final push against the main bad guy of the story was awesome, it should not be done again. This has to be the end from a logic, narrative, and storytelling standpoint. Anything else beyond this is just dragging the story out. It looks bad narratively, Deku's body shouldn't be moving as it is, and everybody already put everything they had on the line. So if you're an MHA fan, I hate to break this to you, but this manga's not gonna see July. I'd highball 3 chapters until All For One is defeated, 4 to 5 chapters to wrap up the story. But all in all, this was a really good chapter. It did everything you would have wanted from MHA, and that's something we need to remember sometimes. This is MHA. It's the feel-good superhero story where only the really non-important characters die. And that's exactly what we got from this chapter, a feel-good superhero story. I believe this chapter, when adapted into anime, will probably make me cry, because while I never cry reading the MHA manga, I definitely cry while watching the anime. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you guys believe this chapter saved MHA from Deku's death-baited arms, or do you think this is a cliche ending to an overdrawn story? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Man, the fact that neither JJK or MHA is gonna see the fall is crazy. My job is gonna look very different in a couple of months.